So we'll get this panel started. If everybody would like to take their seats. My name is Svante Cornell. I'm the director of the Central Asia Caucasus Institute at the American Foreign Policy Council. And it's a pleasure to be part of organizing this event, which mainly has, on our part, been the work of Mamuka Tsereteli, who's right there on the panel, who probably doesn't need much of an introduction other than that. But I think what I would like to say is that this panel fulfills a certain amount of abstinence. Since when I first came to Washington many, many years ago, there was a lot of talk about pipelines. Many of you will remember that. Dr. Blank, Dr. Schaefer were all part of that back then, talking about the pipelines. Our institute produced a number of studies about that back before there wasn't even a Baku-Ceyhan pipeline, and people said it was never going to be built. Then people said there would never be a pipeline from Turkmenistan to China, even while the Chinese were building it. And here we are today to talk about the new landscape of pipelines in Eurasia. And for that purpose, we have a very excellent panel. Our first speaker, and I'll just, the introductions are in the bios that you have. So since we're running late, I will just briefly introduce them. Ed Hartney is the acting director of the Office of Europe, the Western Hemisphere, and Africa, and the Bureau of Energy Resources at the Department of State. And since he covers a lot of continents, it's also very fitting because I think he's worked in 4, if not 5 continents in his State Department career. So that I think he will be able to talk, hopefully, mostly about Eurasia, but maybe about other things too. Robert Scheer is the head of international affairs at BP America, who brings with him a long career, most recently in the Defense Department, as the first Assistant Secretary of Defense of the Office of Strategy, Plans and Capabilities, which is definitely something you need for building pipelines. And other things that you're now involved in from the other side of the spectrum, so to speak. Mamuka Tsereteli, of course, has been first as a Georgian diplomat, then as the founding director and president, I believe, of the U.S. Georgia Business Council, or Business Development Council, is it? Business Council. And then he was for a while also that's part of his business hat, which also includes the importation of Georgian wine into the United States. I would urge you to also attend or to go to the new Georgian restaurant, which is about to open on 10th and M Street, is it? It's already open. There you go. And of course, he's after having started a program on Black Sea and Caspian security affairs at American University. He joined our institute in 2013 and has been with the Central Asia Caucasus Institute ever since. Let me leave it at that, and I hope our speakers will have their brief introductions so that we can then have a discussion in the panel and with the audience. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Working for the kind introduction. I'm going to go through a little bit of an explanation of what the U.S. policy is. I think that will be useful, even though it'll take a little bit of time, because I think it's very important to know what our policy is on Eurasian energy landscape. The U.S. has supported European energy security for many, many years. It's a hallmark of our transatlantic relationship since the Cold War. And energy security of Europe serves as a strong partner for the United States, meeting global challenges in trade and investment. We have a huge amount of trade investment, over $1 trillion between us. And over the past 3 decades, the support has been on a bipartisan basis, going back to the 1990s up to the Southern Gas Corridor today. We may hear a little bit more about that from Bob, I would suspect. But in recent years, we've worked shoulder to shoulder with the European partners on things such as the European Energy Union and the Third Energy Package that you've already heard so much about. We want to make sure that countries outside the European Union cannot use their position or their resources as a geopolitical weapon. Our administration's energy policy is focused on 3 pillars. 1, removing barriers to energy development and trade. 2, promoting U.S. energy exports, including resources, technology, and services. And 3, and most importantly for this discussion, ensuring economic and energy security for the U.S. and our allies and partners. So our policy is clear. Energy security means diversification, meaning diversification of energy sources, energy types, and energy routes. And the European Union shares these goals, and diversification is central to U.S. support for European energy security. And the U.S. Shares widespread European concerns about projects such as that would undermine Europe's diversification, such as Nord Stream 2 and a multi-line Turkish stream. We do not seek to eliminate Russian gas from the market. Russian gas can and should remain part of the diversified energy mix for Europe. We simply recognize the goal of the EU's energy union to enhance energy security through new interconnections, reverse flows, and regulations to incentivize integrated markets and partnerships of new sources of natural gas. And we heard a lot about that in the previous panel about how it's useful to have these small interconnector projects, not just the big pipeline projects. So energy security is a top priority for Europe, particularly in Southeast Europe, because many countries are dependent on a single supplier for gas imports. 13 European countries are dependent on Russian gas to meet more than 75% of their annual gas imports. And we also heard in the last panel how when countries are dependent on Russia, their prices are much, much higher than when you go west and you have more competition. As you know, energy sits at the nexus of national security and economic prosperity. Access to affordable, reliable, secure source of energy is a fundamental national security concern for every country, including the United States. Many European countries remember vividly in 2009 and 2013 when Russia cut off gas supplies to Ukraine and to Europe via Ukraine. These countries view dependence as a national security threat and are working to diversify our energy infrastructure, things like pipelines, electricity grids, LNG, and nuclear facilities, all different types of energy. Now I want to give some examples of how the U.S. supports European energy security. In the gas sector, regional projects such as the Southern Gas Corridor, which will bring Caspian gas to Europe for the first time in history. There are many other ones like the Interconnector Greece-Bulgaria, Bruja, Interconnector Bulgaria-Serbia. They're all fundamental to creating a single European gas market. That's our final goal. It allows gas to go no matter where it comes from, it can circulate freely throughout Europe and meet any contingency. We're pleased with the progress in the Southern Gas Corridor, including the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, which will bring the Caspian gas in. It's real diversification, a new source of gas to Europe. We also stand with the Three Seas Initiative and all the interconnectors to increase energy security along the north-south corridor of Central and Eastern Europe. In addition, there's infrastructure to support LNG imports, particularly in Croatia, Greece, and Southern Europe, to allow Europe to import gas from anywhere in the world. Now, obviously, the U.S. has become an LNG exporter, and we believe that U.S. LNG plays an important role by helping promote more liquid, competitive, and connected markets, and well-functioning gas markets reinforce global energy security. We also, on electricity, strongly support better interconnectivity of electricity markets. We support the Baltic states as they work with the European Commission to desynchronize their grid with the European Union's electricity grid, rather than Russia, and welcome cooperation from Poland to help realize this goal. We heard before about how Poland had made this change, and now we're hoping the Baltic states can. In addition to infrastructure, we support the European Union's implementation of its own market liberalization rules and laws, including the Third Energy Package, which is helping design proper functioning of Europe's gas electricity systems. We continue to partner with European allies to support this. The benefits of diversification are undeniable. We already heard about when Lithuania moved from being 100% dependent on Russian gas, and then they opened in 2015 a floating LNG terminal. And immediately, Gazprom had to reduce the prices by 20% because they had to meet the market. So, and also the U.S. cooperates with European partners and supports many of the projects the EU has identified as, quote, Project of Common Interest, or PCI. There's a list of many, many projects on this that will have greatly progress European energy security through interconnections. We support these projects even though they may have no U.S. government or private sector investment. We support them because they will support European energy security, not as a financial benefit to the United States. And so, let's see. And now I'd like to move quickly to Nord Stream 2 and Turkish Stream. While Europe is working to diversify its energy sector, also confronts projects that would undermine these efforts. The U.S. shares widespread European concerns about projects that would undermine European energy security, such as the Russia-backed Nord Stream 2 and multi-line Turkish Stream gas pipeline. We agree with many European partners that these two projects would reinforce Russian dominance of gas markets, reduce opportunities for diversification of energy sources, It advanced Russia's stated goal of ending Ukraine's role as a transit country for Russian gas exports to Europe. Sometimes people claim that Nord Stream 2 is just a commercial project, but we find that questionable. The project allows Moscow to exert political control in Central and Eastern Europe and Ukraine. As President Trump stated in Warsaw last summer, the United States will never use energy to coerce your nations. We cannot allow others to do so. Now, a single line of Turkish Stream, that does not change the dependency of Turkey on Russian gas because they're already using Russian gas molecules. But it allows Russia to reduce gas transit through the Trans-Balkan line, which currently delivers gas through Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, and Bulgaria. So it's the same molecules, but it would go through Turkish Stream 1. But if there's a multi-line Turkish Stream, that combined with Nord Stream 2 would allow Gazprom the technical ability to end gas transit through Ukraine by the end of the decade. Now that would be, I think, a very serious issue for us because that would cut a vital link between Ukraine and the West while depriving Ukraine of up to $2 billion in annual transit revenue. So that'd be a big issue for Ukraine as well. The good news is that over the past few years, assistance from the United States and others, Ukraine has taken significant steps to bolster its energy security. Again, we talked about this some in the last panel, how there have been some real progress. It's difficult, maybe it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but there are progress being made. Thanks to reverse flow agreements in Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary, Ukraine has not directly imported any Russian gas since November 2015, which is a huge achievement. And the United States is directly assisting Ukraine as it pursues its own energy security goals. We've helped them reform its energy sector, reducing corruption while increasing government revenues. We've also helped on energy efficiency and increasing domestic gas production. Nord Stream 2 and a multi-line Turkish Stream would enhance Russia's and Gazprom's ability to undermine energy security and market liberalization initiatives across the continent. So we welcome the efforts we've been working very closely with Europe on those issues, and we will continue to do so. So that's just a quick introduction of our policy, and thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, there we go. I first of all want to thank all of the organizations that brought this together. It's quite it's a focused area and one that obviously BP we feel very strongly about and are glad to be a part of. And looking around the room and knowing some of you and not knowing others, I suspect that there's very little I can tell you about the broad issue of the Southern Corridor pipeline that you all don't already know. Having said that, they've asked me to speak here, so I'll do a little bit of the broad pieces, but then also get into some of the detail, if you will, of where we are now. By the way, where we are now and what I will be telling you is guaranteed to be wrong because activity is going on all the time. So as soon as I get a piece of paper that tells me what percentage we're done, it's always greater than that. That's a good thing. But it also means that please don't quote on these in terms of the numbers because it's always going to be, we're making progress all the time. I think as folks know, the Southern Gas Corridor really is an integrated gas value chain and of 3 clearly distinct projects, arguably 4, depending on how you break this down. There's obviously in Azerbaijan, in the Caspian, it's Shah Deniz 2, the second phase of that. Building that up, increasing the amount of gas that we're able to produce, taking it then on to onshore in Baku, and then the sort of expansion of the SCP pipeline that goes from Azerbaijan through into Georgia. There's the Trans-Anatolian pipeline, TANAP, which goes through from Georgia through Turkey, that whole length there. Following that, there's TAP, the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, going through from Turkey through into Greece, Albania, and Italy, with a spur off into Bulgaria. This is a huge project, both from an engineering perspective as well as a political and cooperative perspective. We're looking at 7 countries, 11 different shareholders, and agreements with 11 gas buyers. This is again, not only, I would argue, a triumph of engineering, but a triumph of cooperation. And one of the things which obviously is, I think, a broad perspective from all of us, either on technical side or government or EU, is clearly the understanding and the appreciation that we are trying to integrate this region, trying to create gas flows around so that, in fact, we can have an interconnected European gas supply where gas can flow from anywhere to anywhere, and making sure that we have a broader, a redundant system, and one that can cover every place that needs it, free of other pressures from anyone else. So this cooperation, which really I think is sort of unprecedented levels, it really has been, it's from every place, from the political to the safety. And one of the things which we're very proud about is this has all gone on with a very good safety record, far beyond of what we would imagine could happen in a project this large. Just to kind of give some of the stats, and then I'll get even into a little bit more details, it is a 3,500 kilometer pipeline. 500 kilometers of that is actually subsea, and this will bring approximately 16 BCM of gas per annum in 2020 to Europe. 6 of that to Turkey, and 10 of that to Europe further on. Again, to get into some of the details, to make sure that I have this all right, I'm going to refer to my notes and see, because each one of these, please. So let's see. The project is at least 96% complete of the Shah Deniz 2 and the SCPX. We expect its first gas in 2018. And there's a lot of other, 13 wells have been drilled out of 26, and that's all enough to deliver first gas. So making great progress on that first part. TANAP, so we've had construction of the 56-inch pipeline is necessary for first gas to Turkey, and we have construction across all 3 sections. Also, neglected to mention that in Georgia, I think we have the compressor station going through testing right now, the first one, is my understanding. So we are in good shape through all that. This is already 1,600 kilometers of pipe has been welded, probably 15 kilometers lowered in, and over 1,000 hydro tested to date. Again, 2018, Turkey should receive 6 BCM of Shah Deniz gas. As you look more, there's also the very important piece, and I think the one that's gotten a lot of the focus, is the TAP going into landing finally in Italy. We have made progress. There is still work to be done. It is obviously the last stage of this, and we're looking to get first gas in 2020. For those of you familiar with olive trees, yes, we have removed olive trees. This is important. We have some permitting and still some permitting to go, but we've really focused on making sure that we have that license to operate, not just of the permitting, but the license to operate from the people in Italy and the local communities there, and we feel we're making good progress. Even though TAP is by far the smallest piece of the pipeline, it is obviously one of the most important ones as well. And so our focus continues to be on how we can make sure to working with all of the stakeholders to deliver gas to Europe and integrate it into the Western European pipelines that we see starting in Italy. I'm actually going to stop there since we've talked about more, and there's certainly more technical detail that you could ask and that I probably will not be able to answer because I'm in Washington, not on the ground doing that. But I look forward to talking more broadly about this and the importance of the project as other people see it as well. But certainly from a BP perspective, this is one that we're very proud of in terms of the bringing everyone together, of being able to operate this and build this safely, and being able to contribute to the EU's clear understanding of how they look to increase energy security, as well as fitting, I think, well within U.S. policy.
Thank you. I would like to probably start with the kind of main point of my my presentation today. That is that in order to solve long-term energy security problem and natural gas supply problem for Black Sea area and some of the countries of Eastern Europe, I think a key would be to develop and advance energy connectivity between Black Sea and Caspian Sea areas and resources of Caspian to be delivered to the Black Sea countries, Ukraine, as well as other countries in a Black Sea area. And that actually builds on Bob's presentation. This project, obviously, cannot be, the importance of this project cannot be exaggerated. It will be first connection of Caspian Resources directly to European markets with a dedicated infrastructure and with a potential to expand and cover even more, deliver even more natural gas from resources in the Caspian region to European markets. So this is huge progress built on other developments that have emerged in 90s and in 2000s, where collaboration between producer countries, Azerbaijan, and transit countries, Georgia and Turkey, and with the great facilitation of United States at that point, brought this possibility of first to develop early oil pipelines connecting Black Sea and Caspian Sea between Baku and Supsa, and then to develop Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, which was actually the kind of turning point in energy development, energy security for entire region. And we were discussing this in the previous panel. That collaboration allowed for countries to come together and be much closer to each other, build a strategic partnership, but also to be connected to the European and world energy markets as well, and thus also become global actors in global economic actors. Going back to my earlier kind of initial point that what I would like to see is really greater Caspian Black Sea energy connectivity. With all the pipelines that the United States supported in 90s, and those were Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, so-called major oil pipeline at that point, early oil pipeline, pipeline that connects Kazakhstan, Tengiz field to Black Sea via Russia. At that time, that was also a priority project for U.S. government as well, pipeline that serves Chevron's production needs and export needs. There was one pipeline that was never developed and built, which is Trans-Caspian pipeline. And this is the pipeline that's supposed to bring Turkmen gas first to South Caucasus and Turkey, and then to European markets. And in a sense, that's what is missing today in this picture of energy security for particularly Eastern European countries. Just to remind you, I just looked today at Gazprom website, and they have a record year in terms of sales of natural gas to Europe this year. And last year, they sold 25 billion cubic meters of natural gas to Turkish market. This year, they're expecting 22% growth, and about same percentage growth of sales of natural gas from Russia to Europe. With all the talks about, obviously, important role that LNG, US LNG and other LNG plays in the European market, let's be realistic. Countries in Ukraine, Moldova, Hungary, Slovakia, other countries, Serbia, will not have much alternatives for Russian gas anytime soon. So, and unless we think about some kind of strategic solution of this problem, I think we'll be facing this issue down the road all the time, because none of us expects that Russia will change its model of behavior anytime soon. So, and by the way, if you look at the pattern of Russian behavior, it's obvious that whenever they can stop developments, they will try to stop it. If it happens, yes, let's say infrastructure develops, they will try to intervene with the price competition or other kind of maybe corruption or other issues that they could other tools they could use that are in large numbers in their arsenal. So I think that understanding is important for us to continue our thinking about how can we resolve long-term strategic challenge of having natural gas supply coming to particularly in these Eastern European countries that need that gas, particularly in Ukraine. So my um, it's not, again, new idea. It's a very old idea that never actually materialized, but it won't happen without greater connectivity of Turkmen resources to Azerbaijan, to Georgia, Turkey, and then to markets. So I think the development of TANAP is building this basis of where this infrastructure could serve not only purpose of shipping existing natural gas that will be produced in Azerbaijan, Shah Deniz too, but also to take some of the natural gas coming from Turkmenistan and add to this and use the existing infrastructure to establish precedent of shipping Turkmen gas to European markets directly to the consumers. You know, we all know that there are several ingredients that needs to be in place for major commercial developments to take place. It requires market, it requires resources, and it requires infrastructure that connect these two together. And I think this currently rapidly developing infrastructure project related to Shah Deniz resources is creating this kind of opportunity for smaller scale initially shipments of natural gas to European markets, but key obviously will be to find the ways to use resources of Turkmenistan for supplies of to European markets. And that will require, in my view, and probably most of people will agree with that, is that will probably require either expansion of existing infrastructure down the road in 10 years from now or 5, 7 years from now, or development of another dedicated infrastructure element that will cross from Caspian to Azerbaijan, Georgia, and beyond. But this will not happen unless there is a political security solution for this type of decision by the major producing country, which is Turkmenistan. And when we analyze reasons why Trans-Caspian pipeline was never developed, I think we should mention that one of the reasons is that at the right time, at the right moment, Russian Federation, as a literal state of Caspian Sea, introduced this challenge of the limitation of borders in the Caspian Sea. That was one important element in this and facilitation or ignition of some tensions between Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan at that point. We are talking about the late 90s, early 2000s. So Russian factor will remain as an important factor in this consideration, and without some kind of without ways of addressing this issue, this development will not take place. So what are the ways of addressing this issue? We had this discussion earlier today that some countries are becoming members of energy community and so forth, and they are asked to comply to certain rules. But for whatever reasons, European Union is not asking Russia or demanding from Russia to use the same or apply the same rules of game when it relates to export of Russian gas or access of third parties to their pipelines and so forth. So I think there is one missing, huge, important missing element in relationship between in this picture of natural gas pipeline development going forward. European Union is getting tremendous leverage by having Turk Stream gas at some point going to European Union, as well as Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Germany is becoming very, very important and powerful transit country for Russian gas. And Germany will have a tremendous leverage, if it decides to use it, on Russia as well. In a sense, Germany may become not in a full-scale Ukrainian sort of scale of transit country, but it will be, if both pipelines are completed, Nord Streams, and if they are fully utilized, we are talking about 110 billion cubic meters of natural gas. So it's a huge transit capacity. So And this is not only economic leverage, but obviously it's political leverage as well. Plus, we need to think about, European Union actually accepted the reality that by building these pipelines, bypassing Ukraine is losing this very important stream of revenue. This is expected to be $3 billion this year, transit fees, which is, I think, 3% of close to 3% of GDP. So we are talking about very significant negative impact of this bypass, unless it's somehow turned into some kind of benefit. And benefit would be if there is some kind of agreement. I know that it's very hard to achieve, and it looks like maybe, or sounds like very wishful thinking sort of and utopian idea. But in order for Russia to have full access to European markets under those terms and the rules of the game, Russia should allow, and that's an important point, should allow Trans-Caspian pipeline to develop and to serve as a basis for increased energy security for Eastern European countries. So I'll stop here.
Before we, while the audience is collecting their thoughts, let me ask Mr. Hartney, you've focused very much on Western Europe and within the EU, but as we remember from 10, 15 years ago, the support of the United States was crucial for the building of the infrastructure from the east, from the Caspian region, that made possible the type of diversification that you were talking about in your remarks. So I think a lot of us would like to know to what extent you are thinking about and what the United States is doing to support the development of addition of Caspian energy resources, among other, to the European market, and particularly in connection with what Mamuka was talking about. We have Central Asian states today that are pretty much, I would say, in the position that Azerbaijan and Georgia were in the mid-1990s. Should we take the step, should we take the plunge and take the risk of agreeing with to export our energy westward, which would ruffle some feathers in some quarters in the north? But the correlation of forces at that time suggested that it was worth the risk, and it's been a tremendous payoff, both for the region and for Europe. Is anything being done now to suggest for Kazakh decision makers or Turkmen decision makers that there is some political support from Western countries if they decide to do the same thing, i.e. to decide to export their, especially gas resources, but also Kashagan oil resources westward?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that we've been working for many years to try to bring the Southern Gas Corridor to fruition, and it has support from this administration as well. Both President Trump and also Secretary Tillerson have written letters which have been read at Baku energy conferences supporting the Southern Gas Corridor. As for the Trans-Caspian pipeline, that's something that has been considered for a long time, and the U.S., I think, has supported and talked about it for a long time. But there have been a lot of issues of actually bringing it to fruition. I think that with Turkmenistan trying to make decisions of what is necessary to actually get that project moving forward, including some of the border issues that have been discussed. And you also, I think, we mentioned Kazakhstan and other sources of gas. In general, as I said, we are very broadly supportive of European energy diversification. And if there was some way to bring those sources of energy in an efficient, marketable way, I think we would support that. We have, and we're certainly talking to Kazakhstan, we're talking to Turkmenistan, and seeing ways that they can further exploit their gas resources, try to bring more energy diversification to Europe, and also just to strengthen their own economies.
Just a quick follow-up. Is there a do you view the Trans-Afghan pipeline project and the Trans-Caspian as complementary with each other, or is there a slight difference between, should we say, European priorities and U.S. priorities? And is there a way, and if so, is there a way to square that circle?
Well, I actually did serve in Afghanistan, was it 2012 to 2013, and there was a lot of talk about TAPI and bringing Turkmen gas, I believe, eventually to India. And, you're going through a war zone. It's very, very difficult to do that. It's certainly a project that we supported and we've tried to push forward, but it has been very, very difficult to move that forward. I think I'd have to look at the gas export potential to see whether they could do both, but I think we'd be happy if they get moved forward one to try to increase their markets and their potential for exporting gas.
Any reactions from the two of you on this issue?
From the technical perspective, we all know there are great resources elsewhere in the Caspian, that it's not just in places that are specific within Azerbaijan. And certainly, I think any of the companies is looking to try to figure out if there are other resources to be exploited, if that can be done on a commercially viable basis. But obviously, it has not just to be commercially viable, but politically viable. So we'll look forward to seeing how that works out.
What I would say is that we cannot skip mentioning one big actor in this conversation, which is China, that is already importing substantial amount of, it's actually only export market right now for, only significant export market for Turkmen gas. But also China is obviously looking for greater trade connectivity between Caspian and the Black Sea, and going forward, depending on obviously where U.S. policy will stand in terms of Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, because there is no certainty whether going forward U.S. will be very supportive to this project, or will be passive observer, or will be negative sort of attitude to that. But depending on where these relationships will go, China may be, strangely enough, there is a scenario where China may play a very constructive role actually in the process of exporting Turkmen gas to westward, if China has some benefit out of it, obviously. Otherwise, there's no way China will do it. By the way, I wanted to mention as well, some of you may know, some of you may not know, that China is becoming actor in everywhere in the world, including Eastern Europe, including Black Sea, these 3C initiatives. China has its own version of it, which is 16+1 initiative, which is the already formally organized entity of countries that gathers every year. They have summits. Last summit was in Riga, I believe, in last year, where Eastern European countries, both members of EU and NATO, as well as non-members, are gathered together and they discuss issues of mutual cooperation and partnership. So China is an actor, and we cannot disregard that.
Thank you. The floor is open. Who would like to start? Dr. Blank, I see your hand. Do we have yes, we have microphones.
Thank you. Stephen Blank, American Foreign Policy Council. My question is directed specifically to Mr. Hartney, but if other members of the panel want to speak on it, that'd be fine too. You said that if Turkstream is built and it's a single pipeline, that it really wouldn't change the situation because Turkey is already importing a lot of about 2/3 of its gas from Russia, which is true. But isn't this also an attempt to evade Ukraine and European Union rules by selling the gas to Turkey and then shipping it to Europe so that Moscow could evade the European Union? Second, there are enormous gas deposits that have been discovered already in the Eastern Mediterranean, off of Cyprus, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, plus other existing sources in the Middle East. What thinking is there in the administration about trying to take advantage of the situation to bring gas from the Eastern Mediterranean and more gas, if possible, from the Middle East into Europe through these networks of pipelines that can and be built?
Thank you. Let's see. First of all, on Turkish Stream Line 1, yes, it would be the same. Right now, that's going through Ukraine, the Trans-Balkan lines, and it would deprive Ukraine of some transit revenue if instead you have Turkish Stream. I think we've looked at it from a geopolitical standpoint, and also Turkey is very strong in wanting to have Turkish Stream 1. So I think understand your concerns, but our focus is going to be opposing Turkish Stream 2. I think that it depends where Turkish Stream makes a landfall and what possible EU rules would apply to Turkish Stream. But if it's just between Russia and Turkey, it's harder to apply some of those rules. As for Eastern Med, yes, there is amazing, there's a lot of potential there. We certainly support exporting that and developing that those gas supplies and exporting them to Europe or other places. We think that because of Eastern Med, that could potentially help encourage peace and cooperation between the countries that have those gas supplies. So we're very supportive of it, and we're working with all of those countries to try to figure out ways that you can economically viably and politically viably, it takes both, to try to get that gas supplies developed and brought to Europe.
Any other of you? No? Further?
Hi, thanks. It's Emily Meredith with Energy Intelligence. And my question's for Mr. Scher. So you mentioned about, being very supportive of gas coming from anywhere, going to anywhere in your remarks. With the potential expansion of TAP, is there a chance for Russian gas to go through that expanded future project? And then sort of relatedly, how are the financing costs, financing issues that SOCAR is dealing with affecting Azeri supply?
So in terms of the first question, that's not something we're really looking at right now. Obviously, we understand the potential for that, but right now, really, the focus is on getting that everything up and running and living up to the commitments for that pipeline that we've made to the 11 buyers around. And so that's the focus of the effort in terms of the TAP right now. In terms of, sorry, your second question was. Yeah. I think right now, everything, we always watch all these events, but I think we feel pretty comfortable. We have a long relationship with SOCAR. So far, I have not heard of anything that is a concern beyond what we would normally be concerned, and frankly, something that would affect the production or the engineering or any of the other pieces of this at this point.
Yes, sir. And then the gentleman right behind you.
Thank you. Vlad Muzilov, Embassy of Ukraine. So we fully share State Department's position regarding Nord Stream 2, so it's absolutely clear that it's not like a business project, but more geostrategic project, so they are trying to increase their influence on Europe. So, but at the same time, what is the question? So on August 2nd, President Trump signed and countering America's adversaries through Sanctions Act. And according to that act, State Department has huge tools to fight against this project. Actually, it's possible to implement sanctions against Russian export pipelines. So I would be glad if you can provide some information on that. What are you going to implement these provisions of the law regarding Nord Stream 2? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I am glad that we agree on our characterization of Nord Stream 2. As you know, the U.S. has already had sanctions on Russia because of failure to implement Minsk agreement and not withdrawing from Crimea, and also some of the cyber attacks and other things. And then Congress passed, and President Trump signed into law, additional Russia sanctions, including Section 232, which is the section that covers energy pipelines. It's a discretionary law. I'm not going to comment on specific cases. We just published public guidance late last week that I think is very clear, and companies can look at it and can decide whether this or that pipeline falls under the potential sanction. We will work with one of the things that we do is that we did a lot of work interagency and also with our allies, both going to Europe and also they came here to talk to us repeatedly about this bill and the possible public guidance and potential issues. So we worked very, very hard to make sure that we got it right. Our sanctions policy is very carefully calibrated to incentivize Russia to uphold its Minsk commitments and withdraw from Crimea and stop cybersecurity attacks, but also not to hinder or have unintended consequences against our allies. As I said earlier, we very strongly do support, we share Europe's concerns about Nord Stream 2. We continue to work with Ukraine and many other partners on these issues because both of it reinforces Russia's gas dominance and also would hurt your country by depriving it of gas revenue.
Gentleman right
Hi, Shai Franklin with Your Global Strategy. One country that hasn't been mentioned in this conversation is Iran, and I'd appreciate if you could fit it into the context, certainly in terms of Azerbaijan and Russia, but other considerations including Middle East energy resources, transit routes, and the, of course, geostrategic considerations.
I have a quick and easy piece just to make sure everyone is aware that in the Shakhtanis project, it is 10% is the Iranian oil company. So that has been from the very beginning of all this, and you know, so from a technical aspect, they are involved, if you will, in the project. It is also one of the reasons why this project has had to seek to have exemptions in law previously, so that it can continue because of that, the cooperation. But obviously geography is important when it comes to these things, as you've noted, and they are a partner in the Shakhtanis 2 project.
Maybe I'll just add that obviously the administration has grave concerns about Iran, some of its behavior, and also about the JCPOA agreement. So we are reviewing our policy, and I think that's something you have to stay tuned about, but we're certainly not encouraging additional Iranian exports through these sites.
Probably that some new dynamics is emerging in the area with the developments in Saudi Arabia and changes in the government, in the leadership, and so forth. It is obvious that there will be continuation of this, even maybe more escalation of proxy wars between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and under the current kind of geopolitical circumstances, it's very hard to see any role Iran can play in a supply of natural gas to Europe in the long term, or even in regional projects that are under consideration. You probably know that Iran is playing some role in supply of natural gas to Armenia from time to time, but even that role is very limited because Russia is obviously not interested Iran to play any role in the markets that Russia dominates. So in a sense, Iran is facing not only challenge of dealing with the geopolitical realities with the United States and other actors, but also with Russia, because there are certain areas where Russia doesn't want Iran to go, obviously. So.
Yes, sir. At the back.
Kemal Kirişçi from Brookings. I have a question to Robert Scher. You fascinatingly refer to this project from Azerbaijan going all the way to Europe as a triumph of engineering and cooperation. Looking way into the future, do you see the players in that project and the financiers adopting a similar cooperative attitude towards gas from northern Iraq?
Even in my previous job, where I was looked to make some predictions, I disliked that intensely, knowing that we are consistently bad at predicting the future. What I will say is, I think we have some evidence to suggest that some of the pipelines, some of the oil pipelines that we had before, built up patterns of cooperation that were very useful as we look to build the Southern Corridor gas pipeline. In fact, I think there were many people who were surprised that it worked quite as well as it did. And in those patterns of cooperation, I think, are very powerful. Does that mean that they will, just because they helped transitioning in terms of building this new pipeline, that we could see it elsewhere? I don't know, but I certainly, and I don't also want to oversell what it means to do a technical and business deal, if you will, in terms of broader political, geopolitical cooperation. But I also don't think, I think we have evidence to suggest that we shouldn't undersell that either, and that this is an important piece of that. So I would hope so, depending on how that would work. But again, there are a lot of different pieces in all of that. But I'm going to stick to not trying to predict the future, because I'm almost sure I'm going to be wrong almost all the time.
Since the issue of northern Iraq was raised, perhaps our panel could speak to the recent growing involvement of Russian companies in a territory for which the United States has indirectly or directly provided security in the past over 20 years. And what, if anything, is the attitude of the administration towards this?
This is a very recent development of Rosneft taking over some of the pipelines. It is something that we're following very closely and that we certainly are concerned about. It increases Russia's kind of control of that area of gas supplies in that area, including to Turkey. So I don't think I can roll out an administration policy on this, but I can certainly say that it's something that we're concerned about and we're following very closely.
Further, I think we had some hands on the other side that were raised, no?
Good afternoon. Sorry, good afternoon. I'm Bugar Gurbanov from Azerbaijan. I would like to thank all the speakers for supporting Southern Gas Corridor. Obviously, United States was one of the main partners in moving forward this project. BP, who was one of the practical implementers, and Mamuk and Central Asia Caucasus Institute, who one of the intellectually supporting this endeavor. I had a question on a topic which my Ukrainian colleague mentioned, and we know about this energy sanctions, and one of which, a part of which is on energy. And I took note of the answer about not commenting on a specifics or a specific project. So that's why I will modify my question and don't put in the specifics, but a general question. How do you see in 5 years the energy outlook of Europe? I mean, do you see Nord Stream 2, Turkish Stream, Southern Gas Corridor, US LNG, or Northern Iraq? I mean, what would be the shares of all these projects, if any of them? And thank you for commenting. And this question is for all speakers. Thank you.
I have to echo what Bob said about predictions, and I think that we have quite a few predictions that all work together, and so the chances of us being correct is probably fairly low. But I'd make a few observations on what I think might happen. One is that Nord Stream 2 is not inevitable. A lot of times people say that it is, but in fact, it still has to get all of its regulatory approvals. There are also issues of the European Union and looking at either amending its gas directive or getting a mandate, so applying the third energy package to Nord Stream 2. And also Denmark, as their legislator is looking at, I think they've actually either are about to pass or have passed legislation that they can consider these pipeline projects on national security grounds. So I would not say that that's inevitable that you'll have that built. Turkish Stream is actually under construction right now, so I think it's more difficult to stop, quite frankly. It is not completed. Things can get canceled. Look at South Stream, but that's going to be more difficult. I do think that you will have continued reforms in Ukraine, and that will help. I think that Ukraine can have a viable system to continue to bring Russian gas into Europe. You have other sources of gas. It could be Eastern Med, although that's going to take a while, probably longer than 5 years. You have a project called Baltic Pipe, which is to bring Norwegian gas to Poland, so that's another source. And I wouldn't underestimate LNG, not just U.S. LNG, but all LNG. It provides a lot of liquidity to the market, and there are a number of LNG facilities either that are built or some are planned, and they can have a tremendous impact on the market, as happened in Lithuania. Then I'll pass to Bob.
I think since you've stolen my line, I'll let you do that. No, I think the one thing which I would add to all of this is that we should not forget that the increase in demand for gas overall is a good thing for sustainable energy and for clean energy. And that is why I think we're seeing a lot of that. And that's something that I think BP, I know certainly, and other majors are looking at, is understanding that there's going to be increased demand for gas as countries in Europe and all over the world look to turn to more sustainable energy and clean energy production for the timing. So it's hard to imagine that you won't see more opportunities for that, and that, frankly, we should welcome that. And that is a good thing overall as we transition through the fossil fuel, through different fossil fuels into more sustainable energy production.
I would say that Turk Stream is definitely going to be constructed. I think Nord Stream 2 will be constructed as well. But I also think that there is a great chance that some of the gas from existing TANAP may go to via reversed pipeline, Trans-Balkan pipeline that comes from now via Ukraine to Romania and Bulgaria to Turkey. That pipeline can take gas from TANAP to the north and take it to the Eastern European countries. And that's something that we need to think about and focus on, because only language Russian, Gazprom and Russian leadership will understand if you take proactive position. Because with the passive and positions that we have right now and follow what are the developments emerging there and then somehow try to respond or prevent that, it's not going to work. Let's take proactive steps. If it makes business sense, of course, because there's no way something like that could take place without having some commercial merits. But looking at aggregate demand in Ukraine and neighboring countries and how much they pay now for Russian gas, is reversing that pipeline and taking gas from TANAP or maybe some additional line of TANAP could make sense. If I may just follow up on Steve's earlier point on the access to EU market. No, ultimately this pipeline will enter. I mean, this gas will enter in EU territory. So that's again job of European Union to manage this in a way that benefits not only EU member countries but EU interests in general, which is also, let's hope it still exists, shared Western interests. Thank you.
At the next conference on this, maybe we can invite some German representatives to elucidate us about their thinking, unless we have some in the room. If not, are any further? We have time for probably one or two more interventions.
Ceyhun from Azerbaijan, visiting researcher at George Washington University. And Mamuka made a very interesting point regarding the Chinese interest in the region, and maybe just as an additional to what you said, Svante, that maybe you can have some Chinese experts here that we can see what they are talking about, what they are thinking, because I feel like it's a gap in this picture. And my question is that a couple of days ago I was in a different event like this, and there recommendations was one of the recommenders. The panelist was making a recommendation, and he made a concern that there is no U.S. clear U.S. strategy in the Eurasian region. But if we look at Russia and China and maybe Iran and other regional actors, they have it. So do you agree with that statement, or there is some strategy, or it's hidden and it's never clear, or what is that people are from the region in Eurasia, in the Caucasus and Central Asia especially, they are concerned about this. Why it's like this?
I can just add to that. That's something we get very frequently when we talk with people in government positions or non-government positions. where is the United States? Now, especially after a change of administration, I think this is truly a question on the in the minds of many people across the region. Is there a U.S. strategy, and what is it?
Add some oil to the, or fuel into this. Maybe gas, yes. So, in a sense, this somehow resonates to your question about earlier about Iraq and northern Iran. You know, U.S. invested so much time and resources into development. Let's say this Southern Gas Corridor and this earlier pipelines and strengthening sovereignty of Central Asia countries and South Caucasus countries. And like, I mean, U.S. by default, in a sense, served as a provider of public goods in Afghanistan as well, because security in Afghanistan was very helpful to Russians, to Chinese, and many others. But when it came to the contracts for businesses, all those contracts went to Chinese and Russian and other companies in many other places. So I think, but because I think it's a reflection of some of the recent developments of recent years, not necessarily last year, but in the last maybe 10 years. So I think this is essential that we utilize all those, we benefit out of investments that we made rather than others benefit out of those investments. And this is my comment here.
Yeah, Bob, anything more? Are you gonna? Good, thank you. Yeah, I would say, of course, that we do have a U.S. policy. I outlined it, which is to support European energy security. We work with the Europeans on that, and we are looking at a huge number of diversification projects. When President Trump was at the 3 Seas Initiative, he talked about it and how we're against energy coercion, and he named a couple of projects such as the Kirk Island LNG facility that he specifically supported. We've taken a lot of support over the years for Southern Gas Corridor, including recently with President Trump and Secretary Tillerson. So we have been very active, I think, in that. We are working, coordinating even now. For example, I'm here because the acting head of the Bureau is in Europe working on issues, and also my boss is in Europe working on issues. So we are very active actually going around and doing things. And I think that it's easy, quite frankly, from the outside to say, hey, why don't you build the Trans-Caspian pipeline, or why don't you do this? These are very difficult things because you have to see whether they're economically viable and whether they're politically viable to see if they're going to go forward. It's a lot easier to kind of look at the map and point at lines than actually have things come through. And then the last thing I would say is about Afghanistan. Yes, we did obviously had a huge amount of effort in Afghanistan to try to make it safer, and we did a lot of work to try to encourage businesses. We encouraged U.S. businesses to come in. We have a free market model, so we can't tell the businesses to come in. It's up to them whether they do. And I know that a number of companies, such as Chinese companies, came in for various minerals. And Afghanistan has quite a bit of potential in terms of extractives. But my understanding is that not much has happened on it because of the security situation. So we tried to get U.S. companies to come in. Not that many did, but I don't know that they're really regretting it right now.
In part because this is true, and in part from my previous colleagues, in terms of the sanctions, the most recent sanctions law, I just want to make sure that everyone here knows and commend the State Department for working very closely with Europeans and our allies, and that was part of the legislation that was worked very hard by folks, I'm told, to make sure that we could retain the consonance between the regimes. And from the commercial side, it's very important that we have as much consonance in that the regime. And so working very closely with European countries and neighbors, and it's actually a remarkable thing that the State Department didn't have to do it, and it is sort of understaffed right now. So the amount of time that the State Department and Treasury have spent coordinating these sanctions, making sure that they are consistent across Everything is hugely important for the commercial sector so that we don't have to feel like we're operating in multiple different areas and multiple different perspectives. And the State Department deserves tremendous credit for that.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. And I just add that unity is very important, because if there are different types of sanctions for European countries versus U.S. companies, it will be exploited. So we have worked very, very hard to maintain unity. Congress asked us to do that in the most recent Russia sanctions bill, and we have done that. We have gone out, fanned out through Europe. Europeans have certainly come here. We've worked to the private sector also, so we are working very hard to maintain this unity, because that's essential for success.
We have probably time for one last question. Professor Schaefer.
One comment and one question. So in the comment, I think we should be thinking about intra-Caspian pipeline and not trans-Caspian, because essentially what's much more commercially and maybe even politically easier is to link sectors within the Caspian versus actually connecting the lands of the two countries. The question would be to Mr. Scher. You've talked about the advancement in the field, not just the idea of the Southern Gas Corridor, but actually the progress. And in fact, I think we've even had the first testing of gas in between Azerbaijan and Georgia. And BP made a decision in September, announced a decision in September to extend the PSAs with Azerbaijan to 2048. So with extended investment of BP in Azerbaijan and in the Caspian and presence, is it time for us to start thinking about Southern Gas Corridor Phase 2? Which would also maybe perhaps include Central Asian gas, Shah Deniz Phase 3, additional fields in Azerbaijan like Umit and Absheron, potentially East Med gas, as Professor Blank mentioned, from Israel, and reach new markets in Europe, such as the Balkans.
I think, as you noted, the fact that we have longer-term relationships in place now across both the oil and the gas sector in Azerbaijan does allow us, I think, to think about longer-term investments as well. And that's, those are things that we'll have to take a look at in terms of commercial viability and then cooperation with our partners. But I assure you, right now, I think the focus is making sure that we can deliver what we have agreed to and what our buyers expect of us from Shah Deniz 2. And making sure that we don't take for granted the progress and the good work that has been done and the safety record that we've been able to maintain, and that there are more olive trees potentially that we'll need to take care of in Italy where this lands. But certainly we are always open to opportunities if they are commercially viable, and we believe that there is a cooperation and that we can get from all of the stakeholders in this. And we'll have to take a look at that. But the long-term relationship is something that's very important between us and Azerbaijan. It's something that and SOCAR as well, and something that we think is very valuable and has been very valuable, I think, to the region and commercially for a long time.
Thank you. If there is any last word from our panelists, I'd let them have a last word. If not, I think we will break here. Thank you very much. Thank you for the audience, for your participation.
Just a quick word of housekeeping. Lunch is outside in the room directly behind you. We'll be coming back at 12:45 for our third panel. So we urge everybody to get their food and eat it as quickly and come back. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.